supervising and helping us with it. And you recognize that we do have problems. That may not have been the case in the past. I've known Joel Sogol since I was a young DA and he was a young, great defense lawyer, not making much money in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. We met and talked and met at conferences and things. Joel, when he got out of law school, became a public defender in Tuscaloosa. And there's an effort, and we now have a public defender's office in Jefferson County, and they're still growing and learning. There was a public defender's office in another adjoining county that we used to call, they're the agents for the penitentiary. Joel Sogol, that public defender's office was the model for this state, and they still are. But one of the things he serves as a member of the Alabama Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, he is their representative on the prison system, not the prison system. No, you're not an agent for the penitentiary. He represents his clients, but he is a member of the Alabama Sentencing Commission. Came on in 2005, 2006. After I had gone out the door and said, I'm out of here, Joel has stuck with it, but he is seen from the perspective of a lawyer for a number of years, and his practice is primarily criminal defense, but he has a general practice of law, is an excellent lawyer from Tuscaloosa, and a member of the Sentencing Commission. Joel.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Somebody left a watch up here. My perspective on this is probably a little bit different than the other speakers because it's my clientele that oftentimes makes up the population that is bursting at the seams in the prison system. Almost immediately after the Alabama Habitual Offender Act was passed, I represented a fellow who had 3 felony convictions. 2 of them were stealing food. 1 of them was stealing baby clothes for his child. On a Sunday morning, he broke into a car at a church parking lot, and he took a toolbox. And as he was trying to get away, the people inside the church ran him down. He put down the toolbox, pulled out a knife, and said, if y'all come after me, I'm going to cut you to pieces. Turned around and ran. That constituted a first-degree robbery, a Class A felony with 3 priors, life without parole under habitual offender. We tried and tried to settle that case on something else with our prosecutor. He would not. We tried the case. He got convicted. He got a life without parole sentence. The victim in that case, I can tell you, because we spent a lot of time together, went to his grave trying to get my client out of prison. He was so offended by that sentence and never could do it. The problems that I see from where I am are the harshness of the laws that our legislature passes. And I don't want to have this come out wrong, but it seems to me that it is the easiest thing in the world for somebody running for the legislature to say, I'm going to be hard on crime and I'm going to pass these laws and we're going to punish criminals. So that when I have a university student who sells 1 Xanax pill just off campus, at a point in time the minimum sentence is 12 years, 10 years of that being mandatory, within 3 miles of a school and 3 miles of a housing project. Some of our sentencing is outrageous. We had a situation where the legislature passed a law that said any sex crime involving a child, that's someone under 12, will be a minimum 20 years, mandatory, no good time, no parole, got to serve a minimum 20 years. Now, nobody's going to say that we should be soft on people that abuse children. But the reality of what's happened is I've got a 46-year-old client who's not going to make 65 or 66 in prison. You might as well give them life without parole. So what happens? We have to try that case. We have no option. And who really gets victimized at that point? This child who's got to come into court and testify between however many people are sitting in that courtroom about how he or she was sexually abused. And we have created a whole new problem for that child because we are saying we don't care about if this child has to come into court to testify. We don't care about the psychological impact on that child. We only care that we're going to put this guy away. There are better ways to do it. You can give judges discretion. You can give them the opportunity to sentence appropriately in cases. And you don't have to have these mandatory, just unbending kind of laws. I have seen significant changes. I've been practicing since late 1973. Huge changes in the attitude of people. But my practice now, I probably cover about 20 or 25 counties right now. I have active cases that would cover that, circuits that have that many counties in total. And the difference between some of the counties is just amazing. We have a unified court system, right? But as I've been told many times, unified is not uniform. So every time you go someplace else, it's different. Some places you go and the DAs and the judges have taken our presumptive guidelines, which cover drugs and nonviolent crime, and they've taken them to heart, and they really work with them, and you try to move cases and get them settled. I go other places where the DAs do everything in their power to avoid the guidelines. I have two circuits that I practice in where up until the time the guidelines were adopted, which was October of 12 when they went into effect, every person on a sale case, it didn't matter if it was 1 pill, 1 gram of marijuana, 1 joint, had to go to jail, had to go to prison for at least some period of time. Every single case. Didn't matter. Under the presumptive guidelines, that person is not going. So what do we find? In every case I've got in those circuits, the DA is filing motions trying to get around the guidelines, trying to charge things that are not covered by the guidelines, doing everything he can to keep that train going from his courtroom straight down to Montgomery to the prison system. Why? I don't know. The cynic in me goes back to the idea that they're elected. And it's an easy target. People coming through the criminal justice system are an easy target. If you want to get elected, just talk about how hard you are on crime. It doesn't matter what you're doing to the families and the people who are charged. And I'm not going to get into the violent crimes right now, but in the nonviolent crimes, in the drug offenses. The families that get shattered when you send somebody to prison for 5 or 6 or 7 years for possession of drugs, simply because there's no treatment available in your county. You know, rather than try to do something. And Bennett and I have talked about this, and he knows that I place some of the blame on the criminal defense lawyers. Because there is treatment available, there are state facilities available, and sometimes the criminal defense lawyer doesn't do everything he can to find that placement or to get that person treatment. I mean, it's a two-way street to a certain degree. But the harshness of our laws, from my perspective, have contributed greatly, hugely, to our prison problem right now. The other thing that I see, and I'll echo what I think the Colonel said about recidivism, I have people who I have represented who get out of prison and they get back to Tuscaloosa and they show up at my door. And they want to know, can I give them $10? Can I give them $15? Well, I just take them and get them a sandwich. They have no money, no resources. They've gotten nothing out of prison except time. And they have no ability to go out. As a convicted felon, they can't find work. It's awful. And one of the things that has got to come is there's got to be some kind of a transitional situation. I guess I'm going to get into a little bit of the next part. There's got to be some kind of transitional system that's got to come into play. My concern today is, I don't know how many of you keep up with this, but James Tucker from ADAP, which is the Alabama Disabilities Advocacy Program, wrote a letter to the governor and all the members of the Alabama legislature pointing out to them that the proposed funding for the Department of Mental Health violated the consent decree in Wyatt v. Stickney. For those of you who remember, Wyatt v. Stickney litigated from 1970 to 1993. And James pointed out that they would immediately file suit for any violation. And in talking with James, his biggest concern is that all these people who are now in facilities run by the Department of Mental Health are just going to get turned out on the street with nobody to go to, nowhere to go, no way to earn anything. And where do you think they're going to wind up? They're going to wind up in our county jails and to some degree in our prisons, which is only going to make the situation worse than it is today. And I think until our legislators will stand up and take the responsibility for doing what we have elected them for, which is to adequately and properly run this state, that we're not going to get anywhere. So, I'll see you.
What is it you hadn't covered? You don't have to give me all of it.
No, that's all of it. Give them all of it.
Okay.
So just give me the ones that are done. Here you go.